Good morning. It is Tuesday, July 22nd, 2025, 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 Pacific, broadcasting live from Toronto. This is the Mothcast. In the next hour, we're going to be here till about noon. We're going to be talking about the sort of the state of the NDP party in Canada. And some of the issues they faced last election, and kind of what some of those problems were, what some of the problems were experienced, and kind of how things have changed. There was some great reporting in the in a publication called The Breach, which offered some good insights, I think, and yeah, we'll talk a bit about that. Not meant to be sort of an election post-mortem, but more so meant to be a with the NDP leadership race coming up, I think it's just important to kind of be aware of how the NDP has changed, particularly sort of over the last, it's not just recently, it's sort of, more or less been since Jack Layton passed. But before that, just some housekeeping stuff off the top here, as we're kind of getting more into this, as I'm figuring more and more out about this whole streaming stuff. If you miss a broadcast, if you miss a stream of the Mothcast, do not worry. I have a YouTube channel where the VODs will be going up after the show, sort of later in the afternoon, around like sort of 5-ish Eastern, and so you can find them there. And I know, if you did find the VOD there from last week's Thursday's show, you'll. I'm sorry about the audio from the Pierre Poilievre clip from the House. I don't know. I think I might have forgot to enable desktop audio. There was something with the audio where it just wasn't very good, and I tried my best to clean it up kind of for the recording, but it's still not fantastic. So I apologize for that. I also wanted to just correct something real quick about from last week's episode when we're talking about Poilievre and his running in the by-election in Alberta, Battle River Crowfoot. The by-election has not happened yet. I said I think it might have happened. It hasn't happened yet. He's still running right now. The by-election happens August 18th. So just wanted to correct that. Felt that was important to correct. Also, kind of on that note, if folks remember from the federal election earlier this year, in Pierre's riding, a lot of folks were not happy with him. And so there was... he was complaining about how long the ballot was. There was something like 100-odd different candidates that had entered, and he was, I guess, way down the list because of, I think it's like alphabetical order that they put the candidates in. And so he complained about, this is election, they're stealing it. It's election fixing. They're stealing it. Too many people are on the ballot. I personally thought that was really funny. And now a similar thing is happening in this by-election in Alberta, where now Pierre is back to crying and complaining about the fact that no one wants him. And a ballot initiative called the Longest Ballot Committee has, I guess they've been reaching out to people, or they've been doing some great work where there's now about like 50-odd different candidates on the ballot. And so Poilievre's not too happy about that. which is pretty funny. So yeah, just a little bit of update there. Yeah, so yeah, with that out of the way. Oh, the other thing too, in addition to a YouTube channel, I have you can also find me on Bluesky. Those links to those other profiles are on my Twitch profile here, and so you can check me out there. Yeah. So that's kind of all about that. I was trying to figure out a way to like have the profile names like actually on the screen while you're watching, so it's easy. But I don't know how to do I don't know how to do that. So you can find me on YouTube at Mothy1994, but Moth is spelled with a 0 instead of an O, and then it's just Mothy94 on Bluesky if you're interested. Yeah. So yeah, so like we talked about off the top there, we're going to be discussing kind of the state of the Canadian NDP right now. I know that I think a lot of folks aren't happy with the NDP, particularly like, folks on the left are not happy with the sort of the state of the NDP in Canada right now. They were kind of pretty absent in the last federal election that happened earlier this year. Anecdotally, I noticed that didn't see a whole lot of Jagmeet Singh on the campaign trail, and then the NDP lost official party status for the first time in 30 years. The last time they lost provincial or official party status was in 1993. So yeah, it was a pretty abysmal showing for the NDP. And like I said at the top here, this isn't meant to be an election postmortem, because I know we also talked a bit about Polyev and his assessment of how things went down, and then now with the NDP. I know this sort of feels like election postmortem. I promise you it's not. It's just, like I said, it's about it's kind of twofold. It's one, the NDP is in the midst of a leadership race right now to replace Singh, as you may know, resigned after that poor election showing, and also just the NDP is meant to be kind of the left alternative to the right wing conservatives and the coded as centrist but really also kind of right wing Liberal Party. The NDP is the party of the NDP is why we have single payer healthcare in this country. The NDP has done a lot of work on labor rights and such, and but just that's changing now. The NDP is sort of morphing into a bit of a different beast, and sort of my sense kind of from what went down in the election was just that the NDP was sort of coasting a little bit on their whether it was on their image, or just that they figure we're the left party, people will vote, people that want a progressive option will vote for us, kind of thing. And so I think there was a bit of complacency on their part, and we'll sort of so there was sort of some complacency on their part. And then as I was sort of, reading some articles and stuff, getting ready for today, I found this article from City News where they were talking to Charlie Angus, who has been who's held a long time an NDP MP who for a long time had held the riding of Timmins in northern Ontario, or kind of central Ontario. And his sort of assessment of what went down, I think, kind of aligns with kind of what I was sort of seeing anecdotally, because here he says, when it came to the biggest economic and political crisis in memory, I think this is sort of talking about kind of what's been going down with the U.S. and their tariffs. Also, I think just the turbulent economic situation, sort of in the wake of the COVID lockdowns. He says, when it came to the biggest economic and political crisis in history, that should probably also includes like the housing crisis and such. We didn't have an offer on the table because we were selling a leader and his likable personality and style. Which I think kind of bears out because, as I was watching kind of news coverage of the race, you had Poilievre, who as much as he just kind of effortlessly looks like a goof at all times and just always looks like a robot doing his best kind of mimicry of a human being. He was out there meeting, with small business owners. He was out there in shops and bakeries and stuff like that. So he was present on the ground. As well as, Carney was doing big rallies, and he was really hitting home on the hello, Tech Length. Thanks for joining the broadcast. Carney was really hitting home on the kind of stuff with the U.S. that was really kind of bubbling up at that time with the tariffs. You had Trump's rhetoric around Canada becoming a 51st state. Carney kind of started all the elbows up stuff. So Poilievre and Carney were at least looking like they were meeting the moment. And then Singh, where was Singh? It was sort of surprising that, because Singh was kind of here and there. He spent most of his time out west in Victoria, I believe, which is a bizarre choice, because I know BC has typically been fairly progressive in NDP, but why you're going out to Victoria to meet with folks who are ostensibly, when your base is historically been kind of more working class, probably younger, why you would choose to spend so much time in Victoria is beyond me as the leader of the NDP. And it's not like the NDP didn't have any kind of wins to rest back on here. One of them being the supply and confidence agreement that they had with the Liberal Party, which was under Trudeau, which the NDP brought forward in 2022, which was basically like in exchange for the NDP supporting the Liberals in confidence votes, the Liberals would pass through some of the NDP agenda around stuff like pharmacare and dental care, stuff that we're kind of seeing right now with, we're now going to start to see a public dental coverage program. I think is just rolled out for folks who are 65 and older, and I think it's coming for everyone else soon if it hasn't already. Big deal. That's a big thing. Like we saw in the Angus Reid poll on Thursday, big concern for Canadians last election was affordability, and even though we do have public healthcare, single-payer healthcare, it doesn't cover everything. One of those being it does not cover dental care. You need private insurance for dental care. Same for, and then again, the NDP under this coalition with the Liberals also brought through a plan for kind of public pharmacare coverage. Because again, our single-payer healthcare system does not cover medications, or doesn't cover all medications. It's a little, I think it also varies a bit province to province, because provinces administer healthcare. In Ontario with the Trillium benefit, but it's, they're all kind of means tested in different ways, where you can't be over a certain income, you can't work. There's conditions about how many hours you work, about income, that kind of thing. Tech Length, you seem like a pretty smart man. Would you consider yourself as such? No, no. I consider myself to be a curious person, and that's all you need. That's all you need, just to be curious and want to learn. Um, yeah. Um, and which also kind of just as a quick aside, it's kind of like why I'm actually just kind of liking doing this for its own sake, this streaming, because there's stuff that I learn and feel kind of more knowledgeable about, which feels good. I think like a lot of folks, a lot of our media diet gets taken up by what's happening with American politics, which is fair. It's good to be aware of that. You know, America is sort of that's the center. That's the center of the empire, and so whatever happens there will inevitably affect us in some way. And it's not just like America catches a cold or America sneezes and Canada catches a cold. It's like, you know, our foreign policy is often influenced by America, as we talked about in the first stream with Bill C2. Our domestic policy gets impacted by America. Um, yeah. So yeah, would I be willing to take a quiz that you made? Maybe. Maybe we'll. You know, you can send it through. We won't do it today, but we'll do it maybe another day. Got a lot to talk about here at the NDP, but sure, Tech Length, if you want to send that over, we can maybe do it another day on stream. Maybe we'll do it on Thursday or something, or we'll do it on a Thursday, because Thursday tends to be a bit of a shorter stream. Um, so yeah, so the Liberal or the NDP, they had some victories, they had some wins, like stuff that I think was kind of more directly meeting the moment, but they didn't really kind of capitalize on that properly. I think instead they kind of, I think what Charlie Angus said, I think fairly accurately sums it up, where I think it was resting a lot on, you know, the NDP spent a lot of time trying to do social media with their TikTok. I think they were trying to spend more time creating like this sort of social media brand around Jagmeet Singh. You know, he's a younger guy. You know, and it's like he has all the makings of a good politician. He's charismatic. He is personable. He seems like someone who does, I think, have passion about kind of what he's doing and his party's mission. But I think, as we'll kind of get into here, I think the problem that we're kind of seeing is the NDP is suffering a bit from consultant syndrome, and we'll talk a bit about more what that means. We'll talk a bit more about what that means sort of in a moment. But there was an article in the CBC from April 30th, so just after the election, that was sort of talking about kind of, you know, what happened with the NDP here. And you know, I was trying to just find the quote. I just didn't want to hear me. I just didn't want you to hear me typing. But CBC sort of took this, I think, fairly lazy line of reasoning that a lot of news organizations tend to take when it comes to analyzing any sort of shortcoming, or if it's not shortcoming or kind of loss that a progressive coded party takes. It's often used as like, you know, if it's, or it's like during elections, when there's anxieties about, are they too extreme, are they too far left, that sort of thing. So here, you have, this quote from Tari Ajadi at McGill, who said, you can speak to your upper middle class progressive voters in cities, but if you forget your base in terms of auto workers, working class people, it's remarkable to me. There was another quote here. So this is from okay, my name's all mixed up here. But this is from another analyst that they talked to. It's fine. It's from another analyst they talked to. Said that the party mistakenly believed that it could garner support from those who broadly identify as socially progressive. And so I don't think that's entirely wrong. I think that's not that dissimilar from what Charlie Angus's reading of it was, which was complacency, basically. But I think the through line here, I think what the problem that we keep seeing with this kind of analysis is that it always assumes that progressive policies are unpopular, or are alienating to people, or that kind of thing, and which I think we just isn't true. Stuff like as we saw again with the Angus Reid poll from just after the election, folks are concerned about affordability and the economy and cost of living. Carney really kind of hit home on those points. A lot of folks felt that that the Liberals and Carney were better positioned to tackle some of those things. And the NDP has a long history of working with working class folks, with unions such as like the Canada Post Union, with auto workers, that sort of thing. So I think this analysis is right in terms of they didn't properly engage with that base, but it's not. The problem isn't that. The problem isn't being progressive. The problem is not. Just not understanding your base, or not reaching out to your base, not talking to people, not making them feel heard, not being accessible. And Carney and Poilievre ended up looking more accessible, I think, is a big part of the problem. I'm back. So that was kind of CBC's takeaway, and I think that that's just like an incomplete reading, and so I wanted to take a look at kind of like who the NDP is sort of looking at to replace Singh. So right now there is kind of two names in the pot right now. There's Don Davies, who is an MP from Vancouver, and then there is Alexandre Boulerice. I apologize for my horrible French pronunciation, and who is an MP from Quebec. Davies right now is the interim leader while they're looking for a new leader, he has. I sort of took a bit of a look into him and his history and his voting record, and he seems pretty all right. He got a bit of a pretty storied career. He's been serving his riding of Vancouver Kingsway for nearly 20 years now. He was first elected in 2008. When he started as he started in Jack Layton's cabinet as the public safety critic, and then he became the immigration critic after Jack Layton passed and Tom Mulcair took over as leader. And it was actually Davies who pioneered the the pharmacare and dental care policy that was part of the Supply and Confidence Agreement in 2022. He was sort of like a key voice advocating that, and he's been involved in a bunch of community organizations, Vancouver Co-op Radio, Tools for Peace, all these sort of like kind of activist or social justice sort of organizations, and also importantly, he was one of the 7 NDP MPs to hang on to their seat. Critically, Singh lost his seat, so I feel like that's also critical that it's a guy who also really still has a seat in Parliament. And I took a bit of a look at his voting record as well, and it seems to be, pretty all right. So right now there's a bill going through Parliament right now, has I think just gone through the House, and I think it's on its way to the Senate, which is Bill C5, which is meant to be an economic stimulus bill. And there's sort of kind of 2 key parts to it. One being sort of kind of removing some redundancies, some regulation redundancies that exist between the provinces and the federal government. And then the other part is it for infrastructure projects that are deemed to be in like the national interest. It kind of cuts some of the regulation around it. So around like environmental assessment, and also around, and this is sort of the key issue, it also cuts consultation with Indigenous communities that would be affected by things like most notoriously pipelines. And Rachel Gilmore has a pretty good video about specifically that part of Bill C2 over on Instagram or TikTok. So I highly recommend going to check her out for kind of more in depth on Bill C5 and its ramifications. And so Davies he voted against that part 2 of Bill C5, which would do things like cut out consultation with Indigenous communities on infrastructure projects if it's deemed to be in the in Canada's economic interest, whatever that means. And he voted for for part 1 of C5, which is about just removing some of those regulation redundancies to sort of expedite the movement of goods and services between provinces. It's sort of like if it's good enough for the provinces, it's good enough for the feds, which I think will end up sort of cutting both ways. But and then the other thing that he voted for was Bill C49, which standardizes a sort of joint regulatory regime between the maritime provinces, so specifically Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. No worries, rope kittens. We're still here for another half hour, so all good, all good. It basically standardizes a joint regulation regime between the maritime provinces and the feds for new offshore green energy projects, particularly wind. So it just means that there is more... it should smooth out the wrinkles and in the ways in which new green energy projects get approved, like offshore green energy projects, which would mostly be kind of like wind, so like windmills and stuff. So that's pretty good. So Davies seems pretty all right. The thing is, though, he's not super keen on running for leadership. It doesn't seem to be something he's all that interested in. And also just he also the City News also got some reaction from Davies on kind of what went down, um, what went down with the NDP in the last election, um, and I just want to see. There was a reaction here. So I think this might actually. I thought this was a quote from Don Davies, but I think this might actually be a quote from the political science professor that City News talked to at UBC, Max Cameron. But I think still it's sort of relevant here. Just that fair to say the party sort of lost its way. It's got to find a way to make a comeback. Choosing the right person to lead going forward is going to be important in terms of the party making a comeback. But it's going to have a deep conversation, and not that involves the whole party. So basically, just the NDP's got to do some soul searching. I believe though that might be a quote from Max Cameron, not Don Davies. The thing is. So Davies did say, though, that, he intends to join forces with the other parties to determine, I'll show you this, the party's direction as they begin preparing for leadership contests in the months ahead. I think, now that could just be some of your kind of typical, bipartisan kind of pleasantry sort of thing. That's just kind of like, maybe it's just like the thing you say, kind of boilerplate statement that you say when you're kind of in a leadership position. We're gonna reach across the aisle. We're gonna work with all parties. We're gonna listen to all voices. That kind of thing. But that also does give me some pause, just because I think often when you have it always the working with all parties and the compromise always seems to go one way, and that way tends to be rightward. So it does give me some pause that this is sort of Davies' tact, which is we're going to reach across the aisle, in conjunction with some other stuff that we're going to talk about here. It makes me worried, especially with the narrative. In the news, or at least from CBC, being, the NDP, are they too far left? Are you going to see the NDP try to shift to more moderate or kind of shift rightward? So that gives me some pause. Oh, what's up, Yusraj? First time chatter. Thanks for tuning in. My day is going well. I hope yours is going well as well. But yeah, remains to be seen. The guy that they're actually that folks I think are kind of looking at as more likely to be the next leader of the NDP, Alexandre Boulay-Ruiz, is also an interesting guy. He was the VP of QP Local 687, which is a public sector worker union. And has also been a communications consultant there for that union. He I think he won his seat in 2011. So going on 15 years now, and I think he's been there ever since. He also won his seat in Quebec. He in the leadership race to pick a new leader in the wake of Jack Layton's death in 2012. Boulay-Ruiz actually backed Brian Topp, who was an interesting guy. And when I was looking into him, I like the cut of his jib because he's a bit more of a firebrand. But, there's two sides to the coin kind of thing. And we'll talk a bit about that. But in terms of kind of what Brian Topp was kind of campaigning on was he wanted to establish a new tax bracket for those earning over 250K, so like kind of an extra step in our progressive tax structure. He also publicly supported Palestine in 2012, which is, I think, quite something. It's quite striking because it's not like the tides were not shifting then like they are now in terms of, if not, a more popular pro-Palestine sentiment. At least there's a more popular anti-Israel or Israel skeptical sentiment. That was not the case, obviously, 10, 15 years ago. And Yusraj, yeah, I do. I stream. My schedule's on my profile. I do stream Tuesdays at 11 and then Thursdays 11:30 kind of thing. So yeah, this is kind of my usual time slot here. We're going until noon, and then I'll raid the majority report for the American story. So I'm usually here at this time. So Topp, was pro-Palestine. He wanted to abolish the Senate, and he was an advocate for mixed member proportional representation. Which basically means that, so right now in Canada, for those of you who don't know, when you vote for a provincial or federal party, you vote for, you don't vote for an individual, you vote for a party. So if you wanted to vote for, like in the federal election, if you wanted to vote for the NDP, if you wanted Jagmeet Singh to be prime minister, you would just vote. You tick off the NDP and their candidate for your riding on your ballot. But what Topp was advocating for was instead that you vote for your rep and your party separately. So that would mean that just sort of opens up the option for a more diverse and representative kind of pool of representatives. So you may vote for, you may vote for the NDP in your riding, but, you could still, if you're like, well, I don't want the Conservatives to win. The NDP usually doesn't form government, so I'll vote Liberal. It still means, though, that you have an NDP MP, someone who, if those are kind of your values, that aligns with your values, advocating for you. And so it also means things like majority governments are harder to come by. It would mean just a more representation, just a better representation, I think, of the ridings in Canada. And I think more checks and balances on parties, because the majority of governments in Canada are very powerful. Like, people don't realize, but like the prime minister in Canada, in terms of a government position, is very powerful, arguably more powerful than like an American president. Not in terms of like obviously like world influence, but it just mean in terms of like within the actual structure of government. A prime minister, I think, tends to be a little more powerful than a president, at least if we're talking Canada versus the U.S. kind of thing. Yeah, and, Mulcair, so this is interesting because you have Topp, who actually comes in with some pretty progressive ideas, some you might even consider radical for 2012, and you have Mulcair, who was also not much of anything. He was kind of doing the sort of the boilerplate song and dance of balancing budgets and stuff, not sort of being squeamish about any kind of social spending. And so another thing I also found out too was that when he was he started in Quebec's provincial government before he went federal, and in 2006 he was kind of So in 2006, he proposed a condo development in the Mount Orford National Park, and so he was demoted out of his cabinet position from. I can't remember what his title was, but he got demoted to like Minister of Public Affairs or Government Affairs, something like that. Some kind of really kind of bean counter admin position kind of thing. Ustraj usually stream for about an hour. What am I doing to bring more eyes? Promote it on Bluesky. I tell people that I know, like either in Discords or IRL. Yeah. So then also just some more stuff about Boularus here. He introduced a bill C-307 in 2011, which would offer more kind of labor protections for pregnant and lactating women. So basically just gives them further job protection if they have to take any sort of leave related to their pregnancy or to their child, to the health of their child. And then also he did some advocacy on behalf of Canada Postal Workers in 2013 when Canada Post was looking at cutting up to about 8,000 jobs. He was on the ground working with Canada Post, the Canada Post Union, doing education to highlight kind of the effects of these cuts. Beyond that, his voting record has been pretty similar to Davies. Just some things of note. He voted in favor of Bill C-4, which in part updates our tax code, which lowers the tax rate a little bit for those making under $57,000. So instead of they were paying 14.5% tax, and now they only pay 14%. And also added. He also added, or it also included first-time homebuyer rebate, which is proportional to tax paid by an individual up to $50,000, and the market value of the home to a minimum of $1 million. So that's Brian Topp, who Boularus backed in the 2011. That's I'm getting confused. Bill C-4 is part of Davies or Boularus's voting record. Sorry, I'm getting all turned around. Boularus's voting record, fairly similar to Davies, and then also just those other things of note about Bill C-4. And Boularus backed Brian Topp in the 2012 NDP leadership race after Jack Layton's passing. And so, like I said, Topp seemed like a pretty interesting guy. He's known as a bit of a firebrand, a bit of an enforcer. He was not known for being. He was known for being a bit of a bulldog. And when it was like that versus kind of the wishy-washiness of Tom Mulcair, it sort of seemed like a bit of a miss to go with Mulcair instead of Topp. But like I mentioned before, there was some interesting reporting in The Breach about kind of there has been an ongoing kind of lobbyist problem in the NDP. You have a few ideas to share with streamers, and they've been helping get more eyes on their content. I appreciate you, Suraj. I mean, if you want, you just drop them in chat. Like, if it's just kind of like stuff like where to sharing on social media and stuff. Also, I've been thinking about simulcasting to TikTok. I haven't done that yet, as I'm just figuring out Twitch. But I intend to sort of post some clips to TikTok to kind of help me in the algorithms. But I appreciate your want to help. It's very nice of you. So there's some reporting in The Breach about how kind of the NDP has, I think, been getting pulled kind of a bit more rightward. by an emerging kind of by this kind of consultant class or lobbying class. So one of those things being actually Brian Top, who he so when he left politics in 2013, like when he left, not politics, he's still has a political career, he's still involved in politics, but like when he left government rather in 2013, after losing the leadership race to the NDP leadership race to Tom Mulcair, he went off to start a consulting firm, which was called Cool Top and Guy, and the cool in Cool Top and Guy was a guy named Ken Bosencool, who was kind of Harper's advisor, was an advisor under Stephen Harper, and then Guy. So Cool's from the Bosencool's from the Conservative Party, advisor under Harper. Guy was I'm just looking at the article here because I've forgotten his name. But that third guy, is a liberal, former Liberal Party guy. And so what was also kind of striking as I was kind of looking through this was Brian Top's firm has actually done lobbying for CN Rail, which is just interesting because, earlier this year, CN Rail workers were actually in the midst of labor action and nearly went on strike. I think they were actually legislated back to work. I think this was back in January. And so it's interesting kind of how that sort of table has turned, where you have a guy who ostensibly had been involved in kind of passing legislation to protect workers' rights, who is now, I think it's fair to say, he's probably been involved with some union busting, or at least have to imagine regardless, even if not union busting, has probably has been, as sort of is no longer advocating for the workers anyways, is now kind of going to government on behalf of CN executives to make sure legislation kind of shakes out in their way, or that kind of thing. Or if it's not Top, if it's not Top, it might not be Top himself, but it's his firm that is doing this, and of course, being a partner at the firm, I have a feeling there's no way he's not involved with some of these kind of decisions. The other thing too is his firm has also done lobbying for a U.S. coal company, which also just, he's it's been a little over a decade since Top since Top left government, and it doesn't specify exactly when this was going on, this lobbying for a U.S. coal company, but it's just also interesting, sort of given kind of the tenuous relationship we have with the U.S. right now. You also have Brad Levine as well, who has also kind of left politics to go into. He was an influential party figure in the NDP. I just kind of want to be specific here about who Brad Levine was. So he was in the 2015 federal election. He was senior campaign advisor to Tom Mulcair, but he's come from a consulting background or lobbying background. So he's not someone from. He's not unlike Top, who was in government. Levine is part of the consultant industry, consulting industry, lobbying industry, and I think is kind of emblematic of, I think, what's going on with the NDP right now. And actually, in 2022, the Hill Times named Levine as one of the top 100 lobbyists. So, so yeah, that's yeah. So not not great. But Levine, his lobbying team or his consulting firm actually worked on the provincial NDP election, or the provincial election in Alberta, and he had sort of kind of filled up Rachel Notley's communications team and like her press folks, that kind of thing, with more lobbyists and consultants, and you know, we, oops. So again, so it's and you know, that's, we sort of saw how that kind of worked out. The you know, the NDP lost their election in Alberta in 2019, and now now we have Danielle Smith in Alberta, who is a friggin' demon. And so again, I think this sort of speaks to, I think, a disillusionment happening with the NDP because of this influence from sort of consultants and lobbyists, and it's like a lot of like bean counter data nerds who their only contact with the human world is through polling data, and polling is fine for getting a general sense of things, but it's not a Bible. It's not a replacement for the actual voices and thoughts of people on the ground, because, you know, minds are dynamic. People's priorities change all the time. People aren't perfectly logical creatures. So it's not an if that's then this situation. But and, you know, looking at kind of, you know, it's not dissimilar to kind of what was seen in the 2024 American federal election, where kind of the outcome of that, as we've sort of largely seen, has been from, again, lobbyists, donors, consultants who are more concerned about appeasing donor bases, who are, again, not really sort of in touch with people on the ground, but are getting their information from polls, which I think tend to be subject to self-selection bias. So you're only getting data based on folks who are most likely to answer polls, which tend to, you know, often they tend to skew older, you know, especially, you know, with polling sort of having typically been conducted on landlines, tends to skew older folks, to folks who might be maybe sort of middle class or so, who like work regular hours and are thus available when pollsters call, or, you know, are retired. Folks with time, essentially. Folks with time tend to be who tends to most answer polls, and that tends to be indicative of a certain kind of socio-political class. Yeah, so all that is to say, you know, this is kind of the situation right now. And I think I wouldn't be surprised if kind of this consultant syndrome is kind of what was plaguing the NDP this past election, where, again, they were kind of looking at, without really a full understanding of what people's concerns were or what their motivating issues were for this election. You know, instead of sort of, being on the ground, being mobile, we saw what Carney and Poilievre were up to. Instead, kind of instead what they were doing was they were kind of looking at, like, they had seen, they're banking a lot on Singh's, I think, social media presence. I think they were banking a lot on, Singh's younger. So if we just make some funny TikToks, we'll get sort of the younger vote out. If we'll make campaign ads with the right kind of buzzwords, that sort of thing. And that I think backfired. And I think too, it was, the NDP's election to lose. And, I know that usually they're not necessarily the ones that they have never formed a federal government in Canada, but they at least, we have seen that they are more than capable of forming the opposition or becoming the official opposition. Like we saw, with Jack Layton's Orange Wave in 2011, or Orange Crush. And so, it was the NDP's election to fumble because voter turnout was very high. It might have been historically high. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was historically high, I believe. I don't know if that's like the highest voter turnout, but it was very high. I think there were it was sort of like, the count sort of took a little longer. We didn't sort of have a definitive kind of, I think, like, by the end of the election night, I think it was clear that Carney was going to win. But, the reason why they weren't sure if it was going to be a minority or majority government was there was a record number of people who voted in advanced polls, or like through the like advanced polls or mail-in votes, that kind of thing, which tend to get counted. I believe those get counted last after the actual votes that were cast on the day of get counted. And so it was at very least like a record number of like advanced voters that turned out. And I think I think one, is sort of twofold. I think the majority of that was because of, I think, rightfully a lot of people were, shaken up about the rhetoric coming out of the U.S. from Donald Trump. And then also too, the election fell right around kind of the Easter long weekend. And so advanced polls ended up being open over that Easter long weekend. So more folks had, time to go out to the polls. And typically, more progressive leaning parties tend to fare better in elections with higher voter turnout, because usually, the folks who come out to vote are usually the folks who are most motivated to vote, and those tend to be older folks who have time, who tend to be watching, news more. They tend to be getting their information from cable news more, tend to be more galvanized through cable news consumption, that kind of thing. But usually it's because those are the folks who have time. So when you have higher voter turnout, it means now you've got, more young people coming out, more people of different kind of identities and backgrounds and incomes and classes coming out. And that tends to benefit progressive coded parties more. And so there's no reason this should have been, it's ended up effectively being a two-party race between the Liberals and Conservatives, but there was no reason that should have been the case. It should have very much, the NDP should have very much been in the conversation. They just weren't. And they just, they fumbled what was more or less their election to, lose, if we include a victory condition being forming the official opposition. And I think too, we've also just seen, other kinds of, there's been some kind of alarming sort of silencing of certain voices by the NDP in past years. One being in 2022, both of these cases are kind of like provincial cases, so not the federal NDP, but I think it's still fair to say that there is connection between the two, that, one takes its cue from the other, or just that even, just folks' perception of the provincial chapter of the party will definitely color their perception or feelings or attachment to the federal chapter of the party. So, one of the situations being in 2022, a climate activist named Anjali Appadurai, apologies, I probably butchered that pronunciation, was ran for the BC NDP leadership, and she was more or less kind of running unopposed, and was likely to win, but the NDP leadership sort of ran a bit of a smear campaign against her. Let me just find it here. So here, this article is really interesting. So one of the things was, so when she was running, it was sort of realized she was going to win. She would probably win and become the next leader of the BC NDP. The BC NDP official warned the employee at the Canadian Labour Congress that it was far more people than expected in terms of votes, and that Appadurai could very well win and become the next premier of British Columbia. And so they wanted to, quote unquote, salvage this leadership race. And so they tried to change the rules up on her. This is also from reporting in The Breach. The main thing that they did was here. So an emerging class of NDP insiders who have become lobbyists for a variety of corporate interests, including oil and gas, spread a message that Anjali Appadurai was part of a Green Party takeover and was involved in signing up fraudulent memberships. Just interesting how the tact was taken was like, well, this isn't real. This is illegitimate. This a Green Party takeover, which I think is just an absolutely silly, a silly lie. I mean, it's a bald-faced lie, but it's really silly. The Green Party taking over the NDP, like, I don't know who came up with that or who expected that to work. And involved in signing up fraudulent membership. So just a smear campaign, basically, to try and stop this person from running, which I think is interesting because she was running on a platform of she ran here. Let me just show you. She was disenchanted with the government's climate record. Sort of having dealt with some extreme weather disasters. She wanted to improve public service, some bold environmental action, and that seemed to resonate with people. And so it's just interesting that you have these folks coming out of the NDP, leaving the NDP as leaving their roles as MPs or MPPs or leaving the cabinet or what have you, but still kind of being involved through this like consulting or lobbying capacity. And with that lobbying capacity being on behalf of like oil and gas, I think it's just interesting kind of how that ended up shaking out, that they ended up changing things around so she couldn't run, basically. The other thing, which is sort of the more infamous case, was the case of Sarah Jama, who was a MPP from an NDP MPP from Hamilton, who is a a Muslim woman, and she, in the wake of the October 7 attacks in Israel, she came out and said, basically, she expressed solidarity with the Palestinians and that the ethno-state of Israel must come to an end, kind of thing. Like that there has to be. She's basically saying, empathizing with like the resistance against occupation, and just that there just has to be there can no longer be an ethno-state. This must be a single democratic secular state, right? Very reasonable, principled stance to take. My phone just fell over. Sorry about that noise. Nothing wrong with any of what she said. But instead, she was ousted from the NDP, and so she was forced to run as an independent, or forced to become an independent. And then when she was looking to come back when she was looking to run again in when Sarah Jama was looking to run again in her riding as again back as the NDP in 2024, Marit Stiles, the NDP leader who was the one who expelled her from the party in the first place, basically barred her and said no. And she's quoted here as in the CBC as saying, as far as I know, and I'm the leader, it won't be her. And that the NDP was instead going to run their own candidate against her in that riding. So very alarming, kind of these anti-democratic moves the NDP has made, kind of in direct what's the word I'm trying to look for? Just kind of right in the face of kind of what the voters wanted. Jama won her riding with 54% of the vote, like when she first ran and won her seat, so popular and beloved, and I think I think this, Marit Stiles' move to expel Jama, I think, at least among kind of more left-leaning voters, I think was quite a shot to the NDP's reputation, and rightly so. It should be. I think this is quite ridiculous and unacceptable that they would do this. Again, especially like in 2012, you had Brian Topp, who was running for the NDP leadership, who was publicly pro-Palestine. And so Jama's take here is very in line with that. All the other things about Topp aside, it's kind of like a canon in NDP history that they have been publicly pro-Palestine, or at least that's within the Overton window for the NDP. And so I think also just on top of it just being weird that the NDP would run defense for a genocidal ethnic state, it's also the extra layer of this is clearly a Muslim woman who is being censored for speaking up against speaking up. I think that's also can't be overlooked, that racist and Islamophobic element of this. And then as well, the NDP is looking at making some changes to leadership, or how the leadership race is conducted. And there was a piece in the Globe and Mail about this. I have so many tabs open. I'm just seeing if I can find it. Just bear with me for a second here. Maybe not. I can't find the piece. That's okay. The point really is just there's a couple things they're gonna be doing because they were kind of I think the defeat that they suffered really I think shook them up. They lost official party status. They lost they lost a lot of seats. They nearly got themselves wiped out. There was a poor campaign that was run, and so they're looking to make some changes to the leadership race. One of those being they intend to up the entry fee. So currently the entry fee for running the NDP leadership race is $30,000, but they plan to quintuple that. So that is going to increase 5 times over to $150,000. The other thing they plan to do as well is they intend to shorten the race length from 1 year to 6 months, which means just less time for campaigning and less time for meeting people, shaking hands, less time to kind of get your name out there, which means that name recognition is going to carry a lot more weight. And this kind of goes back to the issue that we saw that Charlie Angus highlighted in that City News article, just about that, the NDP's downfall this past election was they were resting too much on a personality. And unfortunately, I think it seems the NDP is leaning actually into that, leaning more into name recognition and brand of a given candidate. And then the other thing that they're planning to do is the leadership will be determined not on membership sold, but on a point system, which is what the Conservatives and the Liberals use. So basically, each riding is assigned for all the ridings that I believe it's like that the NDP control, a total of 100 points is assigned to them, and then the given candidate is awarded points based on their share of the vote in polling done in those ridings, and a candidate has to win at least 50 points in order to become leader. Which also, again, means that name recognition is going to carry a lot more weight because people are more likely just going to award. They're going to pick who they recognize. People pick who they recognize when they go vote. They pick the name that they know. And this kind of just also further reinforces that. It also means that that not everyone's vote is going to count the same for leader. It means that in some places a vote's going to count more than in other places based on just how many NDP voters are in a riding, or how many NDP members are in a given riding. So if you have fewer, your vote counts for more. If you have more, your vote counts for less. And so it's not necessarily going to be a proper representation, I guess, of kind of what people want in a leader. It also means, too, that because they're not out selling memberships and talking to people and, talking about the party's platform, it means that, in the process of selling membership, it means that just people are not going to be as familiar with you're not going to be as familiar with the candidates. And I think what you're going to end up seeing is you're going to have long-standing, stagnant leadership that rests on name recognition, that is not in touch with what voters are interested in or what they're looking for. And you're going to see, I think, a further decline of the NDP as being thought of as a viable party. And I think too the fact that it's also interesting that they're raising the entry fee so much, so dramatically. And in the article, this was couched as they're looking for more serious people, which what they're looking for is they're looking for. This in the case they're looking for kind of wealthier people, and wealthier people who are already aligned with or otherwise have interests that align with that sort of lobbying class that has penetrated the NDP party and the NDP leadership. So they're looking for another kind of Brian Topper or Brad Levine or Nathan Rotman. They're looking for someone with name recognition, which they don't really have right now, at least not in the current party as it stands. There is not currently a Jack Layton. There's not currently anyone with that name cachet, so it means you're probably going to get an outside leader. My thinking is it's not unlikely you would see an outside leader come in who might be more liberal coded than NDP. I'm trying to think of an example who you might. This isn't likely to happen, but it would be something like a Galen Weston would come in, and I know obviously Galen Weston probably wouldn't. Also, I think his reputation is too shot to rehabilitate in this kind of way. But let's just say, it would be something like a Galen Weston would come in. People know the name. They've seen his face around. They know who he is, what he's about, and so that would carry more weight than just given these new conditions on leadership than if a grassroots candidate sort of came in. And it's unlikely now that a grassroots candidate would actually be in contention for leadership, which is again kind of alarming, because it's typically these folks who have been in NDP leadership have been folks who have been not necessarily grassroots, but they've been working with unions, they've been social justice advocates in some way, and this I think kind of is closing the door on that. I worry this is closing the door on that chapter of the NDP. And so what ultimately this will mean is, I think, to continue down this path means the NDP will sort of end up looking more like a liberal clone. I think what this means is the NDP, I think, is just going to sort of become more. It runs the risk of becoming more irrelevant, and it means that what we're likely to see is potentially sort of the emergence of a sort of a more entrenched two-party system in Canada, with Conservatives and Liberals just oscillating between government and opposition. The NDP has done important work as opposition, like we saw with the Supply and Confidence Agreement. They also, in 2008, they defeated the Harper government's first budget, just 6 weeks into Harper's term, by establishing a coalition with the Liberals and the Bloc Québécois. And so I think the NDP, as we sort of saw, from Charlie Angus, from Max Cameron at UBC, the NDP, I think, is forgetting, or is having its history erased. It's forgetting its history, or its history is sort of being strategically erased or manipulated by more pernicious kind of consultant class that is trying to turn the NDP more moderate and kind of neuter it a bit in terms of its social policy. And it's going to be, consultant-brained thinking here is going to be ultimately a death knell, I think. And it makes me worried for what the future of the NDP is. I mean, it remains to be seen kind of what happens with the NDP leadership race. I think they're still kind of working out, or at least I don't have a date for when that happens or what stage they're in sort of picking a leader right now. But it remains to be seen kind of how things look with this leadership race, because the interim leader right now, although he's not necessarily interested in leadership, looks pretty good. I don't think he's fully opposed to it, but I think right now he's not interested. And then you have the guy, Alexander Boularice, who I think isn't a consideration for leadership, and he also seems pretty, I think, fairly in line with NDP, NDP's history. So, but his connection to Brian Topp, I mean, who knows? We'll see. If that connection's still there, who knows? So that's kind of where we're gonna cut it for today. I hope things start looking up for the NDP, and I appreciate y'all tuning in, and thanks so much. I hope you have a good rest of your day, and a good good rest of your day. I hope you have something yummy for lunch. I hope you have a nice evening. It looks like it's a beautiful day out there in Toronto right now. That's where we're going to leave it for the Mothcast for today. Thanks so much for tuning in. From here, we are going to head over to the Majority Report, which just started at noon, for the American story. So thanks so much for tuning in to the Mothcast. We'll see you back here Thursday morning around 11:30. Take care. Bye-bye.
Monitoring and removing your personal information you don't want on the internet. Now, obviously, when I started